Okay, and we are live. Welcome, everybody. It's us, the Art Therapists Association, is back with another live talk on Facebook. We're starting a bit early because we want to do some introductions. And for those of you who are joining us for the first time, welcome. I'm going to hand you over to our guest speakers, Dr. Huma Durrani and Yasmin Vasi. Huma, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Homa, and I'm an art therapist. I have been working with children and adolescents for more than 10 years with developmental and psycho-emotional challenges. I run my own practice, and I'm also the vice president of the Arts Therapist Association. And I am happy to pass on the mic to Yasmin Vasi.
Hi. Firstly, thank you guys for having me on. It's great to be a part of an informative session like this. But anyway, so I am actually an educator. I've been an early years educator for the last 15 plus years, and I've been teaching in international schools in Singapore for the last 15 plus years as well. And so primarily I teach younger kids from 3 to 5 years and 3 to 6, I would say, yeah. And I have a special interest in special needs, and I have my qualifications for special needs, and I try to integrate that into my teaching practice as well.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. I think, Yasmin, it's also important to sort of it might be of interest to people to know how we actually came to this, together for this talk. So Yasmin and I are friends, very good friends. But apart from that, basically we've over the past few years and all, we've constantly been having discussions about behaviors that she comes across in her school, and she works in an inclusive school, and also my work with the children on the spectrum, and also with other developmental challenges. And we found that we kind of got each other, right? We kind of understood where both of us were coming from, and so we thought that we should get together and bring both of our learnings and share them with you guys. So that's why we thought of coming together for this talk. Should we start, Rachel?
Yeah, you can start.
Can we?
Yeah.
Okay. So the topic for today is basically how to manage behaviors that may result from sensory integration dysfunction. And before we go to the behaviors, I think it's important to understand what is sensory integration dysfunction, right? What is SID? It's also sometimes called sensory processing disorder. And it basically is when the brain is unable to process sensory input from the environment in an optimal fashion. And when this impairment, it starts affecting normal functioning, is when it is termed classified as a disorder. So when I say sensory input, it's basically anything that you can touch or feel or see. So to do with your auditory, your visual, your kinesthetic, vestibular. When I say vestibular, it means sense of movement, and proprioception, or the sense of the body in space. So like, I'm seated if I'm sitting, I know that I'm sitting. I know my nose is here. I can touch my nose. I can feel it. Or my hand is here. My arm is here. So, in certain children or in individuals, SID exists as a separate disorder, as a disorder, and in children with autism, it's a comorbid disorder. So this is just one of the things that is also that they're also challenged with, apart from many other conditions or challenges. So that's SID in a nutshell. Just to explain it a bit further, so what can happen is, in a single individual, you can have SID can occur across many domains. So when I say many domains, by domains, I mean across different senses. So a child may be hyper or hypersensitive at the same time. So hypersensitive means that when with certain stimuli, let's say if it's a certain texture, for instance, they're oversensitive to it, and they will respond in a negative fashion to that. And they could be hyposensitive to auditory stimuli. For instance, if there's some a sound, they may not be able to hear it. So they don't hear it, a sound that you and I can normally perceive from the environment, they may not be able to hear it. Or if they're hyper, they will react to it as a negative input, as something that is actually causing them pain. So these sensitivities can occur across many different domains. And so, it's each child will have a very unique sensory profile. Yeah. So basically, that's SID. So Yasmin, how would you connect this to behaviors in the classroom and what you see?
So I think, to put it simply, Homa, I mean, the way in basic teacher's language, we call this hypersensitivity and hypersensitivity as seekers and avoiders. So seekers are the kind of children, imagine in a classroom with 15, 16 kids, we have a seeker. So what he would do, or he or she would do, is kind of be disruptive or hyperactive, as you would call it. So we often find that teachers kind of, in the initial stages itself, label these kids as hyperactive and want to attach a label to them, where actually this particular issue happens due to, as you call it, the sensory disorder. And so the challenging behaviors in these kind of kids may come out in ways of disruption in the classroom, because they can't sit still. They find it really hard to sit in one place, or they don't disrupt other kids' plays. And when children are playing together, they find it hard to kind of contain themselves within that space. Or then it comes out in different ways, where there is physical manifestations, where they may be biting other kids, they may be pushing and pulling, things like that, where they are not able to regulate their own selves, as a result of which leads to behavior, which in turn turns out to be really challenging.
And which brings us to the interesting question that how can you tell the difference between an oppositional behavior and sensory, a behavior that may be the result of the sensory processing disorder, right? So there's a few tips I can give you here, that when a child responds to consequences, right? When a child responds to consequences, so let's say they're throwing a tantrum or something, and they're doing something, and you fulfill that particular need. Let's say they're asking for something, I don't know, whatever, and they calm down. It's usually a behavior. It's not SID, because consequences don't work for SID, for something that is triggering that kind of a reaction. Secondly, visual referencing. If the child is visually referencing you, they're probably aware that this behavior is going to elicit some kind of a response which may satisfy a particular need. And usually with SID, that's not the case, because the child is too overwhelmed. And the reason they're doing it is not because there is an end goal. They're actually trying to cope with a very, very painful experience, which is causing them high anxiety. So basically, that's how you can tell the difference. So if the behavior goes away, where the need is met, it is probably oppositional behavior and not SID.
Yes, so I think we're coming back to your point, Umar, that for teachers, it's because there's such a fine line between sensory disorders and oppositional behavior. It kind of puts teachers into a flux, because for them, with limited time and limited resources, it's easier to kind of blame the behavior and not try anything at all. And so I think, as an early childhood educator, I think for me, I would first try some of the strategies which are easy to use. Like, if I have a kid in my class who does exactly the same thing. So, I've tried the reflection method, where I take him aside and we talk about it. But as you rightly said, it's not oppositional behavior. I put him back into the situation or the setting of the classroom, and he's doing the same thing over and over again. So I know by now that he does have sensory disorder. It's not like he's trying to, kind of do this because he wants to kind of invoke a kind of reaction from me or from anybody else. So in this case, then I would definitely ask an intervention specialist or a behavior specialist to come in. But if, to kind of help me to try other strategies after using and exhausting all my strategies. So, and these are very simple strategies I think we can use in the classroom. And some of them have been successful and some not. And, it's not like one size fits all. So basically, So,
Okay. So I remember we were talking about how art materials can be used for sensory regulation. When people think of art therapy, they mostly think in terms of the art product. So that there's an art product that can be reflected upon, for instance, But with kids who have sensory, I mean, that not all kids developmentally, number one, are able to make a product. So a lot of the times it's just engagement with the art materials. Now, the beauty of art materials is that most of them and all of them have inherent qualities, different qualities to evoke certain responses. So certain emotional responses and certain sensory responses. So just to give you an example, paint, for instance, can be, I mean, this is not, of course, set in stone because some children may react differently to certain material. But for instance, paint is fluid. It's hard to control, and it tends to tap into the deeper emotions. And it also, when you talk about regulation, it can increase the hyper responsiveness. Or the hyperactivity level within a child. So this would be paint, right? On the other hand, pencil is a more restrictive medium. So pencil usually, for, if your anxiety is high and you doodle with a pencil, for instance, I'm sure most of us do that, you can make repetitive marks and all. So pencil usually, it can be a more calming medium. And just like that, Play-Doh or clay, which is more grounding in nature. So these different art materials can be used as sensory modulation tools to work with the different the dysregulation that may be happening within the children. So that's where I think that can be a useful tool for teachers to use within a classroom where you would probably have access to to at least these basic art materials.
And, I do agree with you, Homa, because as we have such a tight, packed schedule, but having something like an art corner is easy to set up. I mean, every classroom, early years does have an art corner. So if you just kind of set up these extra materials there, and it's not any extra work for teachers to do. It's very easy. It's very straightforward. Just have these extra materials, as you talked about, maybe these special pencils or whatever, just to have that in a corner where you could just kind of direct the kid in that to that corner and just help them to regulate. So I think it's not a difficult strategy to implement, because sometimes there are a lot of strategies which can be kind of implemented, but not always feasible because of the time restraint and the schedules we have to follow. And then we have a class of 16 kids who are really young. So actually, I have a little boy in my class, and definitely has a sensory issue that's been determined and established. But he has this tendency, because of his sensitivity in his mouth, he has a tendency to kind of bite, And now I was thinking, and I was wondering, and I have tried Play-Doh with him. She's not interested. How would the art therapies, what else could I do, as you're saying, with the art therapy or art materials to kind of help that to make up for that feeling which he has?
Okay. Before I go into answering that question, I just want to emphasize that only an art therapist can do art therapy. But what you can do is that, the professionals and educators, related educators and professionals can enhance their practices, let's say, through, this is what we call multidisciplinary collaboration and cross collaboration. So what you can do, for instance, first of all, now you're saying the Play-Doh doesn't work. I would say with a kid like that who is probably, you're saying he chews objects.
And he has a tendency to bite because he has.
What else do you notice about his behavior?
So
I just want to say, because obviously there's some kind of an oral sensitivity or a need he's seeking. And you can't, obviously, you're not going to give art material in the mouth, right?
Exactly. So that's it, yeah.
Yeah. So what else can you, I have you observed about that child?
So, well, he's got some kind of vestibular movement issue because he has this tendency, like I talked about earlier, he's hyperactive in using it in this context because he has a tendency to run around, kind of throw things off the table. He's not able to focus. So with that, he has this and this together. So it gets really, really hard in the class for him because he's like constantly running around, and then he stops and he bites somebody, and then he's running around again. So, yeah.
Okay. Well, I've worked with a similar kid, and well, in whose case, I used kinetic sand actually. Now, this kid again would grind his teeth. So one could make an assumption that, okay, if he's grinding his teeth, he's seeking proprioception, right? Which means he's seeking some kind of a strong input. And obviously, like I said, I cannot manipulate with the oral, the mouth or anything. So what I tried to do was I gave him, so kinetic sand, I don't know if you've seen that or used that. Yeah. So what I would do is I would engage him in making molds with the kinetic sand, and basically ask him to actually break the molds with a very heavy movement of the palm. So what was happening was that I was channelizing that need for proprioception, which obviously was also a cause of anxiety because it's a lot of discomfort, through the pounding of that sand.
Okay.
Right.
But so anything else in terms of an art material which would be easier for me to use? Let's say.
Yeah.
Something
so
then he can draw. He's able to do that.
Okay. So, well, give you an example of another client who also was vestibular seeking, so movement, and initially when he would come into the session, what I did was I would give him very thick crayons, big large crayons, thick crayons, and he would break a few crayons before he would actually start scribbling with them on very large sheets of paper, because he was a big boy. So then I gave him more space to do that. And I remember very clearly his mom would sometimes sit in the sessions and watch him, and she would get very perturbed that he was breaking the crayons and he was peeling the sticker of the crayons, the paper. And I told her to kind of just relax, because I realized that the breaking of the crayon, because there were these thick crayons, was giving him some kind of an input that would calm him down.
Right.
So I had kept this box actually separately for him, just for him, because I knew that my crayons were, going to break. So I had this for him. And once he broke a few crayons and peeled some of the stickers of the crayons, he was actually able to then do a lot of scribbling. And because they were thick crayons, he had to apply a lot of pressure to make those scribbles and the large scribbles, and using both hands, a crayon in each hand. So, it's a lot of it is also trial and error. Now, if you're equipped with the knowledge that, okay, these art materials can potentially work this way, right? You give it a try. And if you see the child is not interested or not reacting the way that you think they should be, or fulfilling the purpose that you initially wanted to use them for, then you switch. But I'm talking about very, very basic art material, like, so you paint and Play-Doh, crayons, and this is something that you would normally can easily equip
to incorporate that into because I often find that at this age it's very easy to kind of call kids hyperactive, and a lot of that has got to do with the self-regulation. And I think it is possible to use sometimes, not as always, as you said, basic techniques or strategies in the classroom. And I think it's really beneficial that teachers kind of know this or have this knowledge, because it just would make our life easier for everybody. I think if you have a difficult kid in your class, and if you have strategies listed, then something like what you said, coming from an art therapy perspective, having a little corner of art materials, I mean, that's really, really easy to kind of, So I think
Yeah.
So yeah. So anyway, so that I think it's great having this kind of
But having said that, I mean, just remember that not each child will react in the same way. Because, as I said, the profile is very unique for each child. The sensory profile is very unique. So different things will work with different. But the key thing is observation, and then trying to attune to the child to understand what the needs might be. Because, as you said, very easy to put labels on behaviors without getting to the root of the issue. And it could be behaviors like a kid going off to sleep in the class, for instance. And you wonder, why is this a lazy child? You will label them as a lazy child, not motivated and all. But then understanding what is actually happening, because inherently children want to please adults. They don't want to nobody, that's the thing. And if that is not happening, then is something happening within the environment? Is it, or something happening within the child, like we said, SID or something else, or is something happening in the home environment, right? So
I think
to get
observation is truly it, because I think in my experience, I think when you observe over a period of time, and we are very fortunate. We live in a world of technology, and in international schools there is no issues of videoing the kids, because I have found that when I've had a video of a kid which I've seen over and over again, you can kind of pinpoint and say, okay, it's this. It's harder to do if you don't have these observations in place. It's much harder to kind of determine what might be the trigger or what else it could be if you don't have these observations.
Okay, so I know today's topic is more about art materials and all, but I guess there's also a benefit in understanding or knowing that there are also different developmental stages of art making that the teachers can sort of be cognizant of. So when kids, initially there's a scribbling stage, and then there's a pre-schematic stage, and there's a schematic stage, and all of that. And and I think it would be, and I'm not going to go into the details of each, but looking at the drawings of a child, you can also tell developmentally if there is something that may be going on or not. But I mean, that's just to sort of add, that's going to the next level. So art therapies actually has a very wide scope. I'm only just talking about art materials and using them for regulation. But when we work as art therapists or in a session, that is also something that we observe amongst many other sort of interactions.
I think truly the bottom line of all of this is there should be an art therapist in every school. It's kind of a guidebook, because I think art is a beautiful way. It doesn't feel for parents like an imposition. I think when you tell them that we can use art materials, it somehow seems a slightly easier approach, because it's hard for parents to kind of break the news to them that your kid has a problem. At any level, whether it's an educator or as a therapist. So,
then I should ask you, Yasmin, why don't you have an art therapist in school?
I don't know that. I mean, I wish they would. I think art therapy is very undervalued, to be honest. And I think they don't realize that something like art is a part of our curriculum. So it's so easy to kind of incorporate that, because kids love art. I mean, any child in my class, hypersensitive, would love to come and make an art piece, and they do that in a way of regulation. I mean, they love it. I mean, at that age, they do. So I think what easy way, I think it's very imposing, very hard for them when there are more difficult strategies in place. Or let's say, have to take them out of class to do a particular activity to kind of regulate them, much rather than have a little art corner set up where somebody could help me, regulate them. The easier approach, right? So I think it completely makes sense to
agree.
Yeah. So, I think in a nutshell, we see as challenging behaviors from the time they're 3. And I think it's also because we are more aware of issues now. Maybe 20 years back, this might not be the case, but now I think teachers, parents are much more aware that there are problems, and there can be problems, and they're more accepting of that. So it's good to start at an early age anyways, to kind of nip it in the bud, as they say.
Yeah, agreed. Yep. So, Rachel, do we have anyone asking any questions? Or okay.
We don't have any questions, but I have a question for you. Oh, hang on. Somebody just said something. Thanks for mentioning the public perception to art and art therapy. I agree with issues for the lack of art therapists in the educational system. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So you had a question, Rachel?
I had a question. I was wondering about, in your experience, Huma, besides paint and crayons that teachers could potentially use it in the classroom, what other materials would you suggest that are attainable, that are obviously not too expensive? How about found objects and stuff?
Yes, of course. Frankly, Rachel, I mean, any material that can be, can be applied to a surface or that can be manipulated is an art material, right? So I've used colored sand, I've used shaving cream, although some people are, if you're very careful, worried about the environment, you may not want to do that, but it's actually a big motivator, I find. You can use salt, for instance, for drawing, right? You can just put it in a tray and use salt for drawing. Every kid loves making slime, almost every child that I've come across. And that is, again, a material with a lot of it's great for attachment work and also for tactile input. And kids who are especially sensory defensive, and you want to kind of introduce them to a material to desensitize them, then that is something that usually you can use as a motivator. So yeah, found objects. I mean, any kind of paper. I think things from nature. I usually use a lot of boxes. Empty tissue paper boxes, toilet paper rolls, and all, which can be incorporated in different ways. So let's say a child enjoys painting. Rather than painting on a two-dimensional surface, you give them a box. So you're not just working with. Then again, with regulation, then obviously your goals as an art therapist, then your goals move beyond that also. So you also want to work on their developmentally on enhancing their creativity, or you're working towards other psychological emotional goals. So then
I think using art materials for kids my age is also good for the gross motor. So I think when you're incorporating this, it's not only their taking care of their needs, it's also taking care of the development on the side, right? So, I mean, I know that we recently, I mean, I've never used it as much before, but there was this big block of clay. I was very reluctant to do it. And of course, this was with all the kids. So I was like very reluctant to use it because I was like, I don't know how the kids would take to it. But it was amazing because I think, again, clay has that therapy kind of ingredient, which the more you use it, it kind of regulates you. And it was amazing as to how the kids gravitated towards that bit and were engaged in it for such a long time. So that is a really easy piece of a thing to use in the classroom, right? A block of clay on the table and just let the kids do what they want with it. So,
like playing in the sand pit, for instance. But Yasmin, one has to be careful also because some materials will the child may seek, for instance, paint. Again, I keep on going back to paint because it usually causes this thing. So you also have to be mindful that the hyper arousal doesn't get out of hand. So like I said, so then if, let's say, if the child is getting very aroused and you see that they're getting agitated or something, you will have to switch to a material that is going to ground them. So then let's say switching in between materials. And when you switch in between materials, you are also practicing regulation. Because you're inducing, you're modulating, inducing and modulating. So you're working with these two opposing forces, which is how, people who don't have these issues generally, that's how you regulate yourself. We have an internal mechanism that's built that way. But with kids with SID, that mechanism is impaired. So when you're helping them, you're facilitating that regulation and hoping that they will internalize it. These ups and downs.
There again, I think this can only happen through observations. I think if you're observing over a period of time, you would kind of know what creates that arousal in a child and which doesn't, and you're able to then regulate it because you're the facilitator in the class, and unless you have that knowledge, you're not able to do it, right? I'm not going to be able to just tell. So I think it's one of the key things in early years is an observation and then kind of figuring out what to do.
And then having an art therapist to overseeing all of that.
I completely agree with that. I think it's a huge asset for especially for the early years. I think I don't know about the older ones, but definitely for the early years.
Oh, that's a topic for another talk for the older ones also.
Yeah, why not?
I have one more question, and I think this is quite pertinent to anyone who's watching and who needs clarification. What are the key differences between sensory integration disorder and oppositional defiant disorder? And kind of very clear key points. What are the key differences that people need to be, or teachers, or even art therapists, for that matter, need to be aware of?
Well, I think the difference is the intention behind the behavior. With the ODD, or oppositional defiance disorder, basically the child is doing something deliberately to get, for whatever reason, whether it is to attain something or to just basically
maybe to gain attention,
be oppositional for attention or for whatever reason, right? When it comes to SID, it's beyond the child's control. They are actually anxious themselves, and it's not something that they can help. So that is why you will not see visual referencing. They will calm down eventually once the trigger is removed, and it usually takes it peaks, and then it takes time for the behavior to die down, and it will not die down unless that trigger is removed.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's the difference. Yeah. So incentives are not really going to work with ODD. When the child gets their way, then probably they might.
And you're saying that, and it's so funny. I'm like thinking about this little boy in my class who has this issue. He genuinely has a sensory problem, and when I take him out and we talk about it, it's like he agrees with everything I say. He knows that he's done it all, but he can't help himself. I put him right back into the class setting, and he's doing it again because it's something he can't help. He's aware of what he's doing. He's aware it's wrong. He'll say that to me over and over again, but he would still continue doing it. So
I mean, for me, my prime example is my son, who is now able to voice. I mean, he's had sensory issues all his life. So now, he does these behaviors with his hands, and I think he needs what he needs is a visual stim as well as a tactile stim. So he says, sometimes he would say, "Oh, why are you doing this? Or it doesn't look that good." He'll say, "I'm doing it because it calms me down." So simple as that. This behavior, he's sensory seeking because it calms him down. Simple as that, right? So if in a classroom this child is behaving in a certain way, and if you can't understand, you don't are not, if he doesn't, if you don't either remove the stimulus or you do something to regulate him, what is he going to do? Where is the behavior going to go, and how is it going to disappear, right? So
the major component of all this is that teachers are not aware of this. So I think this information is, again, maybe that's where the art therapist comes in. You can come and give talks about this, because I think these are simple things. I think we all early childhood educators see this in their classroom. So it's not something unusual. But then again, if it's something not so unusual, that means we're dealing with it on a regular basis. Simple strategies should be in place to help us out with this, right? And we should be able to distinguish between the behaviors easily, have certain markers, and just have more of information about this.
Yeah, I guess.
All right, guys. Thank you so much for the answers. So we've got about 3 minutes left, and I'm wondering if anyone has any questions for those who are watching. And if you do, please type them in the chat. Let us know. So while we wait for anyone to come up with any questions, Huma, you were talking about how people can get in touch, mentioning before we came online.
Yes, so I mean, for those people who might watch the video, we have a recording of this, right? We'll have it on the page. Yeah. So, happy to share my email, and they can get in touch. When, we can have a chat. I can answer any questions.
They can also get in touch via the @us email, and we can always disseminate the questions that way. We do have one question from Yuting, who asks, how would you recommend the educational system reimagine the classroom environment?
It's a good question.
Sorry, can you say that again? I missed that.
How would you recommend the educational system reimagines the classroom environment?
Well, I think taking all sensory, assuming that kids are going to come into your class with a sensory issue, I think the environment of the classroom, firstly, it shouldn't be cluttered at all. It should be easy, free space for these kids to move about. There should not be this overstimulation, because that sometimes causes a problem as well. So having these things, I think the basic layout of the classroom, and again, I think the education system should be set in a way that it's a must to have a little art corner in the classroom where you can help the kids to regulate those who need it, and even for the regular kids to kind of de-stress, to emphasize more about the use of art materials within the classroom setting, more as a resource, as a tool to regulate the children.
I think having you can call it an art corner, or just an area where the child can move away from the main, move away from the main and know that this is a place that I can go to just kind of wind down, that kind of like a sensory, for sensory breaks. Because some kids will require, like I have a kid, I'm working with a kid right now who's not able to focus, and they go and they're not motivated to learn. But the reason why they're not motivated to learn is because of attentional or focus difficulties. And so what I recommended to the teacher is that allow them, like after every 15 minutes, allow the child to go and take a sensory break. Now, that sensory break could be just sitting and maybe just playing with Play-Doh, for instance. You ground the kid, you send them back to the classroom, to the main area, and where perhaps they'll be more engaged, right? So it's just a very simple thing to do. You allow that kid, you could have some kind of a signal that you can take your sensory, your break. And the kid goes and indulges in something for 5 minutes, does something, comes back, and is more ready for learning.
But Huma, that's exactly what I was thinking, because if it's a multidisciplinary approach, I mean, taking into account different sensory inputs for kids, I mean, you could just have a simple corner where the kids could just kind of tune off for the 2 minutes and just put on a headphone and listen to some music. I mean, these are very easy strategies to do. So for me, in my classroom, I had a little on the floor, just out of masking tape, I had a hopscotch corner made for the kids. And every time this boy I felt needed that, I would just take him there, and it could be used by all the kids in the classroom. So I think it's very important to also kind of emphasize here that there should be no materials in the classroom which should feel exclusive for a particular child. I think the kid should not be made to feel that, when I'm like that, I'm taken there. It should be something where everybody can access it for their own benefit. So. Yeah,
that's true. Sorry, your sticking suddenly reminded me the sticking of the tape. Rachel, going back to your question about the materials, punching, stamps, those activities are very good for proprioception. So any kind of, those stamps that you get those little cutouts, they require a very hard sort of push, that one. And stamping, cutting, pasting, and stickers or very simple anything, cutting, pasting is very good for proprioception as well.
Okay, excellent. Thank you, guys. That was very detailed. And if anybody has any more questions, they can email us at contact@atus.org.sg, and Huma will get in touch with you. Or if you have any questions for Yasmin, you can still contact us through that, and we'll pass them along. And yeah.
Thank you for having us, Rachel.
Thank you both for coming on.
Thank you, Yasmin. Yeah.
Thank you, Yasmin.
Great. Really enjoyed this. And I think it was a great opportunity. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much, guys. We will end now. We hope to see you again soon. Keep a lookout for our next broadcast, and we'll speak to you soon. Thank you.
All right.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye, guys.